The signal arrived at 3:14 in the morning, and I was already awake. I had not slept properly in 4 days. Not because I was afraid, but because something in the data I had been studying for the past 6 months kept pulling at me like a loose thread in a sweater. I sat at my kitchen table in Geneva with a cold cup of coffee and a screen full of deep space telemetry readings, and I felt the exact moment the universe changed. My name is Elena Vasquez. I am 53 years old. I have spent the last 22 years working as a senior diplomatic officer for the United Nations, and before that I spent 11 years in naval intelligence, where I learned one thing above everything else. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation is not when the enemy attacks. It is the moment just before, when they believe they have already won. The signal was not subtle. It was not meant to be. 40 warships materialized in high Earth orbit simultaneously, appearing on every radar screen, every telescope feed, and every satellite uplink on the planet at exactly the same second. It was a performance, a grand entrance designed to produce one specific emotion in the species watching from below: terror. I pulled up the broadcast feed on my screen. The alien transmission was already self-translating, which told me they had been listening to us for a very long time. The voice that came through my speakers was deep and measured, almost bored, the way a person sounds when they are reading from a script they have read many times before. The message was simple: 48 hours. They said 72 publicly, but their own internal countdown, which I had decoded from the carrier signal embedded in the transmission, said 48. To surrender all orbital infrastructure, cease all independent military operations, and submit to what they called protected status, under the authority of the Kreth Dominion. I wrote down the word Dominion and underlined it twice. Empires that call themselves dominions are always compensating for something. My phone rang before the broadcast had even finished. It was Director Okafor calling from the UN Emergency Operations Center. He sounded the way people sound when they are trying not to sound panicked, which is to say he sounded very panicked indeed. "Elena, are you watching this?" he said. "I am," I said. "We are convening an emergency session of the Security Council in 3 hours. Every head of state on the planet is going to be on that call. We need you there." "I know," I said. "I need you to do something for me first. I need everything we have on Kreth fleet positioning from the last 72 hours. Not the public satellite feeds, the deep space array data. Everything." There was a pause. "That data is classified at the highest level." "Director," I said, "in about 6 hours, classification is going to become a very abstract concept. Please send me the files." He sent them. I spent the next 2 hours going through everything. I was not looking at the warships themselves. I was looking at the spaces between them, the angles, the rotation patterns, the refueling cycles that could be inferred from the heat signatures of their exhaust ports. What I found was interesting, not frightening, interesting. The Kreth fleet was positioned beautifully from a visual standpoint. 40 ships arranged in a perfect arc above the northern hemisphere, visible to the naked eye from most of Europe and North America, gleaming in the early morning sunlight like a necklace of steel. It was designed to be seen. Every element of it was theater. But theater has a backstage, and the backstage of this particular performance had several problems that a careful observer could notice. The ships were arranged for visibility, not for tactical advantage. The arc formation they had chosen created 3 distinct blind spots in their sensor coverage, 2 of which faced in the direction of Earth's own deep space monitoring arrays. They were running on what appeared to be a fixed rotation cycle, with 2 ships at any given time moving to the rear of the formation, in what I recognized as a refueling pattern. This meant that at predictable intervals, their effective fighting strength dropped from 40 to 38. Not a critical difference, perhaps. But predictability in a fleet formation is never a good sign. It means the commanding officer is following a protocol rather than thinking. I wrote all of this down in a plain notebook with a pen, the way my father had taught me. He had been a naval engineer. He used to say that the act of writing by hand forced you to think more slowly than the act of typing, and thinking slowly was the only way to think clearly about dangerous things. By the time I arrived at the UN building, the emergency session was already chaos. I had attended hundreds of Security Council meetings over the years. I had seen arguments that went on for days over agricultural trade policy. I had watched nations that hated each other sit in the same room, and find compromises over things that seemed impossible to compromise on. I had a great deal of respect for what that building represented. What I saw that morning was none of that. What I saw was fear running through a room full of extremely powerful people like electricity through water, and it was not a small thing to witness. The representative from one of the largest nations on Earth was openly arguing for immediate capitulation. The representative from another was proposing a counter-show of military force that would, in my professional assessment, result in those 40 ships reducing every major city on the planet to ash within about 40 minutes. 3 others were arguing about which of them had the authority to make the decision at all. I sat in the back row and listened. I did not say anything for the first 40 minutes. I was still thinking. What I was thinking about was something a professor of mine had said during my first year of postgraduate study in political theory. She had been a small, quiet woman named Dr. Collins who had spent 30 years studying the collapse of historical empires, and she had told our class something that I had never forgotten. She had said, "Every empire that has ever fallen has fallen for the same reason. Not because it was attacked by something stronger, because it became incapable of imagining that anything could challenge it. The moment a power stops asking what if we are wrong is the moment it begins to die. It simply does not know it yet." I thought about those words while the representatives argued, and I thought about the Kreth fleet sitting in perfect, visible, predictable formation above our heads, and I thought about the fixed refueling cycle, and the blind spots, and the self-translating broadcast that told me they had been studying us long enough to learn our languages, but had apparently not studied us long enough to learn what kind of species they were dealing with. They had studied our words. They had not studied our nature. Director Okafor finally called on me. I think he did it partly out of desperation, because the session was going nowhere, and partly because I was the only person in the room who had not yet spoken, and was therefore the only one who might say something new. I walked to the center of the floor. I did not bring notes. "I would like to go aboard their flagship," I said. The room went very quiet. "As our representative," I continued, "before we give them any answer at all, I want to meet with their commander face to face. This is standard diplomatic practice, and they will likely grant it, because empires that issue ultimatums always want to believe there is a chance the other side will simply submit. Giving us a meeting costs them nothing in their own view. They will see it as a formality before the surrender." The representative who had been arguing for capitulation leaned forward. "And what do you expect to accomplish?" "Information," I said. "The most valuable thing in any negotiation is information. Right now, they know a great deal about us. We know very little about them. I intend to change that. You intend to go alone onto a warship full of beings who have just threatened to destroy our planet," said another voice from across the table, "and gather information." "Yes," I said. There was a longer silence. "Why alone?" Director Okafor asked. "Because one person going aboard looks like a diplomat," I said. "A delegation looks like reconnaissance." Another silence. Then, slowly, a few people around the table began to nod. Not because they thought it was a good plan. I suspect most of them thought it was a terrible plan. But it was the only plan anyone had offered that did not immediately result in either complete surrender or immediate destruction. And sometimes that is what passes for a good plan. The request was transmitted to the Kreth fleet within the hour. The response came back in 11 minutes, which was faster than I expected. The Kreth commander, who gave his name as Vorath, granted the meeting. He gave us 12 additional hours for me to travel up and return, which he described, in a tone I recognized from too many years of diplomacy, as an act of generosity. I went home, changed my clothes, drank a full cup of coffee, and called my daughter, who was 26 and living in London, and who I had not spoken to in 3 weeks, because we had argued about something I could no longer remember the details of. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was tight and frightened. She had seen the broadcast. "Mom," she said, "are you going up there?" "Yes," I said. "Are you scared?" I thought about the refueling cycle. I thought about the blind spots. I thought about Dr. Collins and dying empires that forgot to ask what if. "Not yet," I said. "I'll let you know if that changes." She laughed despite herself, which was what I had hoped for. We talked for 4 minutes. I told her I loved her. Then I picked up a single data tablet, walked out of my apartment, and got into the car that was waiting to take me to the shuttle. The last thing I said to Mission Control before the shuttle doors closed was quiet enough that only the person sitting next to me could hear it. I said, "Keep the lights on. This won't take long." And I meant it. The Kreth ship was unlike anything I had expected, and I had spent 2 days trying to prepare myself for exactly that feeling. Preparation, it turns out, does very little when you are actually floating through the docking bay of a vessel that is 3 times the length of any aircraft carrier ever built and crewed by beings that look at you the way a person looks at something they found under a stone. I stepped off the shuttle and onto their deck, and I did 2 things simultaneously. On the outside, I looked around with the expression of someone who is impressed and slightly overwhelmed. On the inside, I started counting. Ceiling height, approximately 9 meters. Corridor width, 4 meters. The lighting ran in strips along the upper edges of the walls and produced a faint blue-green tint that I suspected was calibrated to Kreth visual preferences and was probably slightly disorienting to human eyes. I filed that away as a mild but interesting detail. My escort consisted of 4 Kreth soldiers. They were tall, perhaps 2.5 meters, with narrow torsos and long arms that ended in 4-fingered hands. Their skin had a grayish tone with faint banding patterns, like the rings on certain stones you find near riverbeds. Their eyes were large and set wide on their faces, which gave them excellent peripheral vision. Their uniforms were a deep charcoal color with a single strip of gold running from the left shoulder to the right hip. I could not immediately tell rank from the uniform alone, which meant their rank signaling system was more complex than a simple stripe pattern. I would need more data. They led me down the main corridor without speaking. I had been informed through the pre-meeting communications that a translation device would be available during my meeting with the commander, so I did not try to initiate conversation with the guards. Instead, I walked and I looked, and I kept a running commentary going in the back of my mind. We passed 3 intersections. At the first, I counted 8 Kreth moving in both directions, none of them armed, which suggested this section of the ship was considered secure. At the second, I noticed a pair of heavy blast doors in the closed position on the left corridor, and a faint warmth coming from that direction that could indicate a reactor or a power generation facility. At the third intersection, I counted the number of steps it had taken us to get there from the docking bay and converted it to an approximate distance. I was building a map. Not a complete one, not even a very accurate one, but a map nonetheless. We went through 2 more corridors and then entered a wider passage that opened into what I could only describe as a hall. High ceilings. The far wall was made of a material that was either very dark glass or something functioning like it, and through it, I could see open space and, far below, the blue curve of Earth. It was beautiful. I allowed myself exactly 3 seconds to experience it as beautiful, and then I went back to counting. There were 12 Kreth in the hall, standing at what appeared to be workstations arranged in 2 rows. They did not look up when I entered. This told me something about their command culture. The arrival of a foreign diplomat was not considered interesting enough to merit attention from working crew. That level of confidence, or perhaps contempt, was itself information. At the far end of the hall was a raised platform, and on the platform was a chair that I will not call a throne because calling it a throne would make it sound more dramatic than it deserves. It was simply a very large chair, elevated, positioned to look down at anyone standing below it. The architectural message was clear. You are small. I am above you. This is the natural order of things. Commander Vorath was already seated. He was larger than the soldiers who had escorted me. Not dramatically so, but enough to notice. His banding was more pronounced, running in darker stripes across his face and neck. His eyes, when they fixed on me, were steady and completely without warmth. He had the expression of someone performing a task they find mildly tedious. A small device on the arm of his chair produced a soft tone, and then his voice came to me in accented but clear English. "Ambassador," he said, "you are smaller than I expected." "You are taller than I expected," I said. "I suppose we are both full of surprises." His eyes moved in a way that might have been a blink, or might have been something else entirely. I filed it. He spoke for several minutes. I will not reproduce every word because most of it was the same ultimatum I had already heard, but delivered in person, and with what I am certain was intended to be crushing psychological weight. He spoke about the Kreth Dominion's history, which stretched back approximately 6,000 years. He spoke about the 14 other species who had been brought under Kreth authority, and he was careful to say, brought under authority, rather than conquered, which told me this was not only his phrasing but his genuine belief. He spoke about Earth's future under protectorate status, which he described as stable, prosperous, and peaceful, which are three words that powerful people always use to describe arrangements that primarily benefit themselves. I listened. I nodded at the appropriate moments. I made my expression look like respectful attention, which is a face I have spent many years learning to produce on command. While he spoke, I was watching his hands. Specifically, I was watching the way he held them. His left hand rested flat on the arm of the chair. His right hand was held slightly raised, fingers loosely curled, which is a posture that in many species indicates underlying tension managed by conscious control. He was performing certainty. He was not feeling it. That was very interesting. When he finished, he said, "Does the human government accept these terms?" I said, "Commander Vorath, before I answer, I would like to ask you a few questions. I hope you will indulge me. It is our custom to fully understand an agreement before accepting it." He gave a small motion of his head that I took to mean assent. "Your ships," I said, "are remarkable. The energy output your fleet is producing is impressive. I am curious about the power systems, specifically, the crystalline matrices I noticed in the heat signature data. Are those standard across your entire fleet, or are different ships outfitted differently?" There was a pause. A very short one, but it was there. "Standard," he said. "Fascinating," I said, and I meant it, though not for the reason he probably assumed. I wrote something on my tablet. I made sure he could see me writing, though he could not see what. "And the refueling cycle your vessels appear to be running, approximately every 11 hours, if my reading of the heat signatures is correct. Is that also standard for Kreth fleet operations at this distance from your home systems?" This pause was slightly longer. "You are asking about military specifications," he said. "I am asking about practical considerations," I said pleasantly. "If Earth is to become part of your dominion, it will presumably be called upon to supply or support Kreth fleet operations. Understanding your logistical needs seems relevant." He studied me for a moment. Then he answered, "Not everything, and not precisely, but enough. Enough to confirm what I had suspected from the heat data. Enough to know that the 11-hour refueling cycle was accurate, and that it involved a 2-ship rotation, and that during the rotation period, those 2 ships ran at significantly reduced operational capacity." I asked 4 more questions in the same manner. They were all framed as questions from a cooperative party trying to understand its new situation. Each one sounded completely reasonable. Each one extracted a piece of information that I needed. Then I asked about their formation's communication range, framed as a question about how quickly Earth's new administrative requests could be processed. He told me, somewhat impatiently, that the fleet operated on a tight beam relay system that was highly resistant to interference, but had a fixed angular coverage limitation on the forward arc. I looked down at my tablet. I did not let my face change, but I remember thinking, there it is. That is the piece I needed. Then I looked back up at him and I said, very calmly, "Commander Vorath, I have a counteroffer for you. I think you will want to hear it." He smiled, or at least, his facial muscles moved in a way that seemed analogous to amusement. "You are in no position to counteroffer anything, Ambassador. You have 72 hours remaining. After that, the question of offers becomes irrelevant." I looked at him for a moment. Then I smiled. It was a small smile. Genuine. "You won't last," I said. The room was completely silent. Every one of the 12 crew members at their workstations had stopped moving. I do not think they had ever heard those words directed at their commander before. I suspect it was not a common experience for him either. Vorath leaned forward very slightly in his chair. "What did you say?" "I said you won't last," I repeated. My voice was even. "Not because I am threatening you. I am not. I am telling you something true, as one professional to another. You have made several assumptions about this situation that I believe are incorrect, and those incorrect assumptions are going to cause you a significant problem. I would like the chance to help you avoid that problem." He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "I will give you an additional 12 hours before the deadline, travel time, for courtesy. He said it as though he were doing me a favor. He said it in the voice of someone who is certain they have just watched the last desperate move of a losing player. He said it the way people say things when they have not yet understood what they are looking at. I thanked him. I gathered my tablet. I walked back through the corridors with my escort, counting steps, noting temperatures, reading the ship around me like a sentence I was partway through. By the time I reached my shuttle, I had everything I had come for. I sat down, strapped in, and as the shuttle pulled away from the Kreth flagship and began its descent toward Earth, I pulled out my notebook and wrote one line. I wrote, "They answered every question." Then I closed the notebook, looked out at the planet coming up to meet me, and began to plan. The shuttle hit the upper atmosphere at 6 in the morning, Geneva time, and I was on a video call before we cleared the cloud layer. Dr. Nathan Clark was the head of Earth's Joint Scientific Response Team. I had worked with him twice before, once during an emergency collaboration on a deep space communications project, and once during a classified review of theoretical energy systems that most of the world's governments did not know existed. He was 47 years old, perpetually undercaffeinated, and one of the 3 or 4 most intelligent people I had ever met. He picked up the call with a cup of coffee halfway to his mouth and his glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Elena," he said, "what did you find?" "Crystalline energy matrices," I said. "Standard across the entire fleet." Vorath confirmed it. Nathan put the coffee down slowly. He confirmed it directly? Indirectly, but clearly. And Nathan, the resonance work from the Zurich team in 2031, the theoretical framework, is any of that documented anywhere beyond the original published paper? He was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, there are 23 follow-up files that were never published, internal research. We got close to something before the funding was redirected. How close? Close enough that someone shelved it on purpose, he said. Elena, what are you thinking? I am thinking, I said carefully, that we may not need to build anything new. I think we may have already built it without knowing that is what we were building. There was a long pause. That, Nathan said, is either the best news I have heard this week or the beginning of a very long night. Both, I said. Get the Zurich files. Get your team together. I will be on the ground in 40 minutes. I landed at the Geneva facility to find that something extraordinary had already begun. This is the thing about humans that I think is genuinely difficult to explain to anyone who has not lived through it. When we face a real threat, a clear and present and unambiguous threat to our collective existence, we do not wait for instruction. We do not form a committee and schedule a meeting and draft a proposal for the committee to review. We start, independently, simultaneously, in 100 different places at once, without coordination, without a central signal, people who have the ability to help begin helping. I walked into the facility and found that Nathan's team had already been awake for 3 hours, not because anyone had called them, because they were the kind of people who watch a global broadcast of a fleet of alien warships appearing above the planet, and then go to their lab and start working, because that is the only thing they know how to do with a problem. There were 17 people in the main research room, engineers, physicists, 1 material scientist who had driven through the night from Lyon, and 2 people from what I will describe only as a government agency whose name I am not permitted to write in full. On the wall was a projection of the Kreth fleet formation, annotated with the data from my 2 hours of observation aboard the flagship. "The blind spots," said a young engineer named Oliver Grant, pointing at 2 areas of the formation I had marked. "If we are right about the tight beam communication system, these 2 sectors are not just visually unmonitored, they are outside the active relay coverage. Anything passing through those sectors on the right trajectory would not be detected until it was already within close range. But we are not planning to pass anything through those sectors," I said. "We are not planning an attack." "No," Nathan said. He had pulled up a second projection beside the first one. It showed a series of mathematical curves that I recognized from the Zurich paper. "We are planning a demonstration." The Zurich work from 2031 had been focused on something called coherent resonance propagation. The original purpose had nothing to do with weapons. It was an attempt to develop a new method of wireless power transmission for deep space applications, the idea being that energy could be transmitted over long distances by sending a precisely tuned resonance signal that excited a specific type of crystalline lattice structure. The problem the Zurich team had encountered was that the signal, when it worked extremely well. Too well. It did not just transmit power through the crystal, it disrupted the crystal. Completely. In the original experiments, the target lattice had not transferred energy. It had simply stopped functioning. The paper was published. The funding was redirected. The follow-up research was shelved. The Kreth energy matrices were crystalline lattice structures. "We are not going to fire anything at their fleet," Nathan said, very carefully. "We are going to activate a resonance transmitter in low Earth orbit, aimed at a single unmanned Kreth drone vessel at the outer edge of their formation. And we are going to demonstrate what coherent resonance propagation does to a crystalline matrix at close range." "One ship," I said. "One ship, unmanned, chosen because it sits at the edge of the formation, in a position where the rest of the fleet has clear visual on it." I looked at the projection. The drone ship he had selected was a small vessel, positioned at the far left of the Kreth arc. It was, I knew from my observation aboard the flagship, a monitoring platform. No weapons, no crew, minimal strategic value. But it was a Kreth ship, and what happened to it would be visible to every other Kreth ship in the formation. "How long to build the transmitter?" I asked. "It is not a matter of building," Nathan said. "The European Space Infrastructure Array already has the hardware. We designed it for power transmission experiments. We need to modify the targeting software and recalibrate the frequency to match what we know about Kreth matrix composition. Based on the data you brought back," he looked at Oliver. Oliver said, 36 hours, maybe 32 if we do not sleep." "You will not sleep," I said. He smiled slightly. "No, I did not think we would." I stood there in that room, and I looked at those 17 people, all of whom had arrived before anyone told them to, all of whom were already working on a problem that most of the world thought was hopeless, and I felt something that I do not have a single word for. It was not quite pride. It was something deeper than that, something more complicated. We spent the next 20 hours in that room together. I ran the coordination side, keeping the political channel open, managing the information flowing back and forth between Nathan's team and the joint command that was watching everything from a secure facility outside Brussels. Nathan ran the science. Oliver ran the engineering. The materials scientist from Lyon, whose name was Caroline Webb, turned out to have written her doctoral thesis on exactly the kind of crystalline matrix disruption that the Zurich team had documented, and the 3 hours she spent with Nathan's data changed the calibration window from a rough estimate to something much more precise. I did not tell the Security Council what we were doing. I told them we were preparing a response. I told them to trust the process. Several of them told me they were not comfortable with that answer. I told them that I understood, and that I would keep them informed. Then I went back to working with Nathan. There were moments during those 20 hours when things went wrong. The targeting software crashed twice. A calibration model that Caroline had built turned out to have an error in its third equation that cost us 4 hours to find and correct. At one point, around 3 in the morning, Oliver put his head down on his desk for what he said would be 5 minutes and was still asleep 40 minutes later, and nobody woke him because he had not slept in 2 days and he had already solved 2 problems that nobody else in the room could have solved, and the 5 additional calculations he would do in the last 2 hours before launch would only be possible because someone had let him sleep for 40 minutes. At hour 22, with 14 hours remaining on the Kreth deadline, Nathan looked up at me from his screen and said, "We are ready." I looked at him. "Are you certain?" "I am certain of the mathematics," he said. "I am reasonably confident in the hardware. I am as certain as a person can be about something that has never been done before in the history of this planet." "That is enough," I said. I sent a message to Commander Vorath on the secure channel that had been established for our communications. It was brief. I told him that Earth had prepared its response to his ultimatum, and that we would like to demonstrate it rather than simply describe it. I suggested he ensure his fleet had a clear visual on the drone ship at coordinates I specified, which were the outer edge monitoring platform. Vorath's response came back in 18 minutes. It contained 3 words in English, which his translation system had clearly had to work to find. The 3 words were, "This should be interesting." I read them and felt, for the first time since the ships appeared above Earth, a brief and specific kind of satisfaction. Yes, I said aloud, to no one in particular. It should. I looked at Nathan. He looked at me. Let's begin, I said. The drone ship went dark in 11 seconds. I was watching the feed from 3 different orbital cameras simultaneously, and all 3 showed the same thing. One moment the Kreth monitoring platform was exactly as it had been for the previous 60-odd hours. Running lights active, power signatures steady, turning slowly on its own axis in that metronomic way automated systems do when they are functioning normally. Then the resonance signal hit. There was no explosion, no fire, no dramatic light show. The running lights simply went out, one by one, in rapid sequence, like someone switching off lamps in a house as they walked through it toward the door. The power signature flatlined. The rotation stopped. The ship became, in the space of 11 seconds, a piece of drifting metal with no more life in it than a stone. The silence in our facility lasted about 4 seconds. Then Oliver said, very quietly, "It worked." Nathan did not say anything. He was looking at the readouts with the expression of a person who has spent their entire professional life proving that a theory is correct and has just seen it confirmed in the most definitive possible way. I recognized the expression because I had seen it on my father's face once, a long time ago, and it was not a thing you forget. My tablet lit up. Commander Vorath was calling. I answered immediately. His face on the screen was different from how it had looked when I was aboard his ship. The deliberate calm was still there, professionally maintained, but underneath it, there was something that I recognized from decades of watching people negotiate under pressure. It was the look of someone who has just revised their understanding of a situation very rapidly and is not entirely comfortable with what the revised version looks like. "Ambassador," he said. "Commander," I said. "That was your counteroffer." "That was our demonstration," I said. "Our counteroffer comes now, if you are willing to hear it." He was quiet for a moment. On the screen I could see, just at the edge of the frame, one of his officers saying something to him in rapid Kreth that the translation device did not catch. Vorath made a small gesture with his right hand, and the officer stopped speaking. "I am listening," Vorath said. I had prepared what I was about to say during the long hours in the facility, and I delivered it the way I deliver things I have prepared, without notes, without hesitation, and without any element of apology in my voice. "Earth does not want conflict with the Kreth Dominion," I said. "We have never sought conflict with anyone. Our history is more complicated than that, but our intentions toward other spacefaring civilizations are straightforward: coexistence, communication, mutual respect. We would like to have that relationship with the Kreth. We believe it would benefit both of us more than the alternative." "And what do you want in exchange for that?" Vorath said. "Several things," I said. "First, your fleet withdraws from Earth orbit within 6 hours of our agreement. Second, Earth is recognized as a sovereign spacefaring civilization, with full rights to independent operation, under whatever interstellar framework the Kreth Dominion recognizes. Third, non-interference. We do not engage in your conflicts. You do not direct ours. Fourth, access to interstellar navigation data. Not military data, travel data, safe corridors, hazard mapping, the kind of information any civilization shares with a neighbor." Vorath nodded slowly. "These are things we can consider," he said. "There is a fifth," I said. Something in his expression shifted. He had been prepared for the first 4. He was not prepared for the 5th. "A formal apology," I said. "Broadcast on the same channel you used for your ultimatum, to every person on this planet who saw that broadcast, acknowledging that the ultimatum was issued in error." The silence that followed was the longest silence of the entire negotiation. "Ambassador," Vorath said, "you are asking me to tell my own fleet and every species within broadcast range that the Kreth Dominion made a mistake." "Yes," I said. "You understand the implications of that for our authority." "I understand the implications very well," I said. "I have spent 23 years working in diplomacy. I know exactly what I am asking." Another silence. "And if we do not agree to the 5th condition," he said. I looked at him steadily. "Then we have approximately 11 hours and 40 minutes remaining on your original deadline," I said. "I would rather we spend them productively." I watched him think. It was visible. The way it is always visible when very powerful people are confronting the fact that the situation they thought they were in is not the situation they are actually in. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes over a person in those moments. It is not peaceful. It is the stillness of very fast internal movement. Then he said something that I had not expected. He said, "How long have you known?" "Known what?" I said. "That you had the capacity to do what you just demonstrated." I considered my answer carefully. "The theoretical foundation has existed for 15 years, I said. "The specific application to Kreth technology was something we worked out in the last 2 days, based on information I gathered aboard your ship." He was quiet for a moment. "You were gathering intelligence during the diplomatic meeting." "I was asking questions," I said. "You answered them. I am grateful for that." Something that might have been dry appreciation moved across his face. It was brief and probably unintentional. "May I tell you something, Ambassador?" he said. "Please," I said. "We have been studying Earth for 230 years, he said. "We have detailed records of your political structures, your military development, your economic systems, your communication networks. We began this mission because the data suggested that within the next 2 generations, humanity would reach a level of technological capability that would make you a significant presence in this region of space. Our assessment was that it was better to establish authority early, before that capability was fully developed." He paused. "What our records did not adequately prepare us for," he said, "was the rate. The rate at which you respond to problems, the rate at which you adapt, the rate at which you produce solutions that should not yet exist. You should not have been able to develop a counter to our energy systems in 2 days. It is not possible in 2 days. And yet." He gestured at the drift data from the dark drone ship still visible on whatever screen he was watching. "And yet," I said. "Our analysts have been incorrect about your species before," he said, "but never quite so specifically. And never with quite these consequences." I said, "Commander Vorath, that is the most important thing you have said since I boarded your ship. You studied our words, our structures, our records. But the thing about humanity that is difficult to study from a distance is the thing that you just described. We do not respond to problems according to our records. We respond to problems according to the actual problem in front of us. Every time, without exception. The gap between what we should be capable of and what we are actually capable of, when the situation demands it, is something that our own records do not adequately capture either." He looked at me for a long time. "The apology," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "It will be broadcast as you requested." I said, "Thank you, Commander." He said, "Do not thank me. Acknowledge what this is." "What is it?" I said. "It is the beginning of something neither of us fully understands yet," he said. I thought about that. Then I said, "In my experience, those are the only beginnings worth having." The broadcast went out 40 minutes later. I watched it from the roof of the Geneva facility, standing next to Nathan and Caroline and Oliver, and the other 14 people who had not slept in 2 days, and had changed the outcome of the most significant event in the history of our species. The sky above us was clear, and the Kreth ships were still visible, still arranged in their arc, but now each of them had begun the slow, deliberate movement that indicated a withdrawal sequence. One by one, they repositioned. One by one, the formation dissolved. The last ship crossed behind the moon's shadow at 4:22 in the afternoon, and I watched it go, and I felt the weight of the last 4 days settle over me all at once, the way exhaustion always arrives not during the work, but in the first moment after it is finished. Nathan said, "Is it over?" "This part is," I said. 6 months later, I am sitting at the same kitchen table where I sat when the signal first arrived. The coffee is warm this time. The screen in front of me is not showing fleet telemetry. It is showing the draft of the document you are reading now. People have asked me many things since the Kreth withdrew. They have asked me how I knew. They have asked me if I was afraid. They have asked me what it felt like to save the world, which is a question that always makes me smile, because it contains a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually happened. I did not save the world. The world does not need saving in the way that question implies. The world is not a passive thing waiting to be rescued. It is a system. A large, complicated, deeply imperfect, occasionally maddening system of 8 billion people who disagree about almost everything and are simultaneously, when the moment requires it, capable of the most precise and extraordinary cooperation you can imagine. Nathan's team was 17 people who had not been told to gather. They gathered anyway. Caroline drove through the night from Lyon because it was what she could contribute, and so she contributed it. Oliver solved problems in his sleep that he could not have solved awake. An engineer whose name I am not permitted to include in this document modified the targeting software twice in 4 hours, under conditions that would have paralyzed most people, and produced results that were more accurate than our theoretical model predicted. I did not organize any of this. I provided the initial information and the coordination framework. Everything else was the system doing what the system does when it is given a real problem and enough trust to work on it. This is the thing that Kreth had studied for 230 years and still did not understand. They looked at our records, and they saw our limitations. They saw our conflicts, and our inefficiencies, and our political gridlock, and our history of disagreeing with ourselves about almost everything. What they could not see from the records is what those things produce when the pressure is right. We are not a species that functions well when nothing is at stake. We are a species that functions extraordinarily well when everything is at stake. That is not a comfortable way to be. It is not a quality I would have chosen, given the option. But it is what we are, and 230 years of observation from a distance did not capture it. I think about my father sometimes, when I think about all of this. He used to say that the most useful thing an engineer could ever learn was the difference between a system's designed capacity and its actual capacity. The designed capacity is what you see on paper. The actual capacity is what you see when the system is under load. Most systems perform below their designed capacity under load because stress reveals weaknesses. Some systems perform above it. Those are the systems, he used to say, that are worth understanding. I received a message from Commander Vorath 3 weeks ago. It came through the formal diplomatic channel that has been established between Earth and the Kreth Dominion as part of the ongoing normalization process. But it was not a formal communication. It had no official header. It was 6 sentences in very clean English, and the translation was clearly Vorath's own rather than a department's. He wrote, "Ambassador, we have spent 200 years studying your species. We have updated our files substantially since our meeting. We still do not fully understand you. I am not certain we ever will. Is that intentional?" I read it twice. Then I replied. I wrote, "Mostly." Then I wrote a second line. I was not certain when I wrote it, whether it was diplomatic or not, but I decided it was honest, and I have always believed that honesty is the better long-term strategy. I wrote, "But you are welcome to keep trying." I sent the message, and then I sat back in my chair, and I thought about a particular kind of fear. Not the fear I felt standing on the deck of that warship, which was real but manageable. A different kind. The fear that comes from understanding, in a very clear way, that the next time someone looks at what humanity is capable of, the stakes will be higher, that we will be further out in the universe, that there will be more of us, and we will be more capable, and the problems will be larger, and the decisions will be harder. That fear is real. I sit with it. But then I think about Oliver asleep at his desk at 3 in the morning, having solved 2 problems nobody else could solve, and Caroline driving through the night from Lyon because it was what she could contribute, and Nathan's face when the readout confirmed what the theory had always said was possible. And I think we are going to be all right. Not because we are strong in the ways strength is usually measured. Not because we do not make mistakes. Because we make tremendous mistakes constantly, and visibly, and often in ways that are very difficult to watch. Not because we are united or orderly or efficient or predictable, but because we do not stop. Because every ceiling we have ever encountered in our history as a species, we have looked at, argued about, disagreed about, approached from 17 different directions simultaneously, and eventually walked through. Because the gap between what we should be capable of and what we are actually capable of when it matters is a gap that we have never managed to measure accurately because it keeps moving. Vorath said it to me aboard his flagship. In a moment I do not think he intended as a compliment. We came to stop a threat before it became unstoppable. He may already have been too late. I wrote that line in my notebook the night he said it. I have looked at it many times since then. It sits next to the line I wrote on the shuttle coming back from the flagship. They answered every question. I think both of those lines are true. And I think, taken together, they say something about what it means to be human in a universe full of older and larger and more established things. We are not the strongest. We are not the most ancient. We are not the most organized or the most efficient or the most feared. We are the most persistent. And we are, when we need to be, the most surprising. That is enough. That has always been enough. My daughter called yesterday. She is doing well. She asked me if I was going to write about all of it, and I told her I was trying to. She asked what I was going to call it. I told her I was not sure yet. I told her the title was the hard part. She laughed and said, "Mom, it should just be what you said to him. That's the whole story." She is 26 years old and she is already smarter than I am, and I told her so. And she said, "You won't last," in a terrible impression of my voice, and then laughed again, and we talked for 40 minutes, and I did not think about the Kreth fleet, or the resonance transmitter, or the 11 seconds it took for a ship to go dark. I just talked to my daughter. And that, I think, is also what it means to be human.